Hey guys, Spud here, and welcome to my DCS F A-18C cold start tutorial by the book straight from the NATOPS manual. In today's cold start tutorial, we're going to be performing an APU start. Just like the way 99% of all those DCS World players out there will usually start their FA-18 Hornet. However, if you guys would like additional variations on the cold start of the FA-18, such as role-playing that your APU is in up, or sitting alert waiting for a scramble call, please let me know in the comments section down below, and I would be happy to make additional tutorials for these variations. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump in and get started. Okay guys, we've got a beautiful day in Afghanistan here for our cold start tutorial by the book, straight from the NATOPS manual. The first thing we need to do here upon entering the cockpit of our FA-18C is check the bureau number plate on the right vertical console just to the left of the wing fold mechanism. We can see the bureau number of our FA-18 today is 165407. This is important to note as your bureau number is going to change the procedures prescribed by the NATOPS manual, because there's a huge variance of equipment installed on the nearly 1,000 FA-18A, B, Cs, and Ds delivered to the US Navy and Marine Corps. And when it comes to the cold start procedure, right off the bat, we have a split in the procedures between aircraft that are between bureau numbers 161353 through 161528, and aircraft 161702 and up. Now for us, we're going to be following the procedure for aircraft 161702 and up, because of course we fall into that category here. So to start off here, we're going to perform the battery status check. We're going to come down to the battery switch on the forward section of the right-hand console, and bring the battery switch to the aft override position and make a 5 count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then check that our emergency battery has at least 23.5 volts. We can now bring the battery switch to the forward on position and make another 5 count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and check that our UBAT has at least 23.5 volts as well. With a successful battery status check, we can move through the NATOPS manual to the first All Starts section. We already have our battery switch in the on position, and we can now perform our fire test. It's important to perform a fire test before every flight in your FA-18C. We'll first click with a right click to bring the switch to the forward Test A position, and hold it while we check to ensure all of the master warning lights illuminate, and Bitch and Betty can make her way all the way through her tape.
Bleed air left, bleed air left, bleed air right, bleed air right.
Once that's finished, we can return the switch to the norm position and reset the system and rewind the tape by recycling the battery switch. We can now perform Test B by clicking and holding with a left click.
Engine fire left.
Again, we're looking for all the master warning lights to illuminate, and Bitch and Betty to make her way all the way through the tape.
APU fire. Bleed air left, bleed air left, bleed air right, bleed air right.
Fantastic. We'll go ahead and clear out the master caution, and with a successful fire test, we can move through our NATOPS manual to the If APU Start section. So we'll go ahead and check that we have our APU accessories light extinguished on the master caution and advisories panel. We can then move over to the left-hand console and bring the APU switch to the forward on position. We need to ensure that the green APU ready light illuminates within 30 seconds, otherwise your APU may not be able to start your engines. Once we have a green ready light, we can move through the NATOPS manual to the next All Starts section. In the A-18C, we always want to start the right-hand engine first. On the engine crank switch, use a right click to bring the switch to the right-hand position. Monitor the RPM on the IFE, and with a minimum of 15% RPM on your keyboard, use the right shift and home key to bring the right throttle to the idle detent and introduce fuel to the combustion chamber. With our late model Lot 20 production Hornet, Bitchin' Betty is going to do a GeForce test where she makes an annunciation of roll left, flight controls upon engine rollback and stabilization.
Roll left. Flight controls.
Alright, once Bitchin' Betty has passed her GeForce test, we can clear out the master caution and move down to the next all-aircraft section of the NATOPS manual. We'll bring power to various avionics systems, including our left and right DDIs, our heads-up display, our MPCD, and some of our UFC avionics. We'll turn on our TACAN and set up our air-to-air TACAN for today. We'll turn on our radar altimeter, and we'll move to ensure that we have our HMD turned on as well. We'll ensure that all of the HMD symbology is displayed correctly, and we'll move down and check the health of our engine on the IFE. We're looking to ensure that the RPM, temperature, fuel flow, nozzle position, and oil pressure are all within safe and acceptable limits for our F404 GE402 engine. Once we have that complete and we are happy with our engine, we can move to the next section of the NATOPS manual labeled If APU or Crossbleed Start. At this point, we can cycle the bleed air knob 360 degrees through the off position to turn the bleed air from the two engines back on after the fire test. This will allow bleed air for our ECS systems to help keep us cool and comfortable in the cockpit, pressurize the cockpit, and for various pneumatic systems throughout the aircraft. And now that we're not going to get too hot in our bubble canopy, we'll also go ahead and close the canopy. With the canopy locked, the canopy caution and advisories on the left DDI will disappear. We then need to perform a warning and caution lights test. Move to the internal lighting panel and click and hold the test switch in the test position and scan across the cockpit for any burned out lights that need to be replaced before we go fly. Alright, everything is looking good, and we should be good to go. We're now able to go ahead and start up our left-hand engine. We'll go ahead and reset our track IR here while we're there. Move back to the engine crank switch, and crank the left engine with a left click. Monitor the IFE, and again with a minimum of 15% RPM, bring the left throttle to the idle detent with right alt and home on your keyboard. Again, this is going to introduce fuel to the combustion chamber, and we should see our light off. Alright, at engine rollback, we can move down to the next All Start section of the NATOPS manual and check our engine RPM, temperature, fuel flow, nozzle position, and oil pressure are within safe and acceptable limits for our F404 engine once again. Once we're satisfied that that left engine is healthy and good for flight today, we can move to the before taxi section of the NATOPS manual. We want to check and ensure in the HSI data page that waypoint 0, where our aircraft is starting today from, is as accurate as possible for our INS alignment. So we'll check our coordinates, as well as the elevation of our airfield here, whether that be way up high here in the mountains of Afghanistan, or way down at sea level on the Persian Gulf map. We'll also then move down to the INS knob and bring the INS around to the IFA position if we have good GPS signals and GPS receivers are installed in our aircraft. I'm going to make a separate video to go over all of the different options on the INS knob here and when you should use them. But for the vast majority of you guys here in DCS, just throw that guy over to IFA and set the radar to operate. Don't worry about frying the ground crew. The squat switches will prevent the radar from emitting on the ground. We're then going to check and ensure that our wing fold handle is in the spread and locked position, and we're also going to visually check that our wings are in fact spread and locked. We can now perform our FCS reset. I always like to make sure that I have my FCS page up on one of my DDIs so I can ensure that my aileron X's go away when I hit that reset button. We'll move back to the left-hand console and give a nice firm press on that big FCS reset button. We can then skip quite a few procedures in the NATOPS manual because it's unlikely that we'll have an FCS reset failure here in the DCS F-A-18. So we can move on down to the number 10 trim check section of the NATOPS manual. We'll check to ensure our stab trim, our roll trim, and our rudder trim are functioning normally and correctly. And we'll try to reset our rudder trim as close as we possibly can back to neutral. We'll then press and hold the takeoff trim button until we get an advisory trim light appear in the bottom left of our left DDI. There's advisory trim. We can let go of that switch and bring our flap switch to the up auto position. We can then perform a controls check. We're going to look for 24 units nose up on the stabs with full aft stick, 3 units nose up on the stabs with full forward stick, 20 units of differential on the stabs with full left roll, and 20 units of differential on the stabs with full right roll. Once we've completed a successful flight controls check, we can then bring the flaps down to half for our takeoff position. We'll then cycle the rudder pedals all the way 30 units left and all the way 30 units right. That looks like a good test. We're then going to check some secondary flight controls. We'll ensure that our air-to-air refueling probe can extend successfully. Looking good. And that it can retract successfully. That's looking good. We'll also check our speed brake. Our hook. Our launch bar, which is optional for land-based operations. And finally, our pitot heat. We'll bring the pitot switch from the auto position to the forward on position, and this one takes a little bit of roleplay because it would require your plane captain to touch your pitot tube to let you know that it's warm. We'll bring that back to the auto, and we'll roleplay that our plane captain has said that it's heated up and we're good to go. We're next going to need to check our emergency avionics cooling scoop. However, I recommend going ahead and skipping this check in the NATOPS manual here in DCS, because it does require your plane captain to manually restow the scoop by simply just pushing it back in, which we don't have the ability to do here in DCS. So we'll skip it for now. Next, we're going to verify that our APU is shut down. It is automatically shut down and we are good to go. Whether that shutdown was manual or automatic doesn't matter. We're going to set our bingo setting for today's flight, which will be 5,000 pounds. We'll ensure that we have our altimeter set for the local altimeter setting, which will be 3000 for today. We'll ensure on the aircraft data page that TAWS is in fact boxed for today's flight. And while I'm here, I'm also going to change over my TAC blim to nav blim to make my autopilot a little less violent in coupled mode. We can now go back to the main HSI page, and why don't we go ahead and bring the stick back. We're now able to load the mission data from our DTC to our aircraft's systems. So we'll go to the support menu and up to the MUMI page and select the partitions that we'd like to load, ALR 67 and COM. We know that these are loaded when we have a box around these various partition names, so we can go on back to the FCS page. And of course, we don't want to forget to uncage our standby ADI as well. And we can now set our various weapons and sensors as desired. So for our FLIR pod, which is going to be a lightning pod on the centerline station, we'll bring it to the standby position. We'll turn on our ALR 67 radar warning receiver. We'll set our ECM to standby. And we'll check our stores page and our weapons configurations. We can see we've got an LMAV on our left outer station. We'll check that visually. And a couple of GBU-12s on our right outer station. We'll check that visually as well. That's looking good. And we've got 2 external fuel tanks on the left inner and right inner stations as well. We'll also set up our various weapon options, such as our laser codes for our weapons, our delivery mode for our GBU-12s will of course be auto, our E-fuse will be instant, and our laser code will be the same 1 triple nickel. Good to go there. It's now time to align the HMD in our cockpit. Please do note that the canopy has to be down and locked for a successful HMD alignment. I'll typically open up the HMD page on my right DDI, but it really doesn't matter. It's important to note that the NATOPS manual does not specify which screen should be on which page at any particular time. We'll go ahead and hit the align function for the course alignment. We'll match up the 2 brew crosses on our HMD and in the HUD, and press and hold the cage uncage button. Once we get an align OK, it's time for a fine alignment. We need to use our TDC to match the X and Y axis of the top plus sign with the brew cross on the HUD. Get that as close as we can, and press the cage uncage button. Now we're going to align the Y-axis of the bottom plus sign with the brew cross on the HUD. That's looking good. And we'll go ahead and save the alignment by hitting the align function on the HMD page once again. At this point, you can also go ahead and set up your various mid options, or mids options I should say, and we'll go back to the FCS page. Now, in the NATOPS manual, there's now quite a few options that we can also skip if we do have a failure to align our HMD. We can then see as we move through the NATOPS manual, for the next section, we have to do an oxygen systems check. And this splits between aircraft that are equipped with a liquid oxygen system for the pilot to breathe from, or an OBOG system, or onboard oxygen generation system. Being a Lot 20 Hornet, we have an OBOG system. So we'll come all the way back to the aft section of the left console, bring the OBOG switch to the on position, we'll check the oxygen flow and put our mask on and ensure that we can breathe normally. And then once we perform the test and everything is good to go, we can bring the oxygen flow knob to the off position. The next all aircraft section has us entering in an event ID, and this is not relevant to DCS World, so we can go ahead and skip that section. It's also worth noting here that the canopy either must be fully up or fully down for taxi. So we can now move to the taxi section of the NATOPS manual. First, we'll go ahead and set our external lighting as required and turn on our landing taxi light to let our plane captain, as well as other ground crew and any pilots who are also taxiing around us, that we're about to start moving our aircraft. We'll then turn off the parking brake. Ensure that our hook bypass is set to field. I missed that in an earlier section. That's why it's always good to run your eyes across your cockpit for anything you may have missed. And we'll go ahead and start our taxi out. We'll add a little bit of throttle and immediately perform a brakes check. Make sure that our nose wheel steering is turned on and do a quick nose wheel steering check. Looks like nose wheel steering is set and good to go. And we'll start our taxi on out to the runway. As you're taxiing, I recommend always having your head out of the cockpit, looking around for any threats, personnel, objects, other aircraft, things of that nature. The vast majority of aircraft accidents, both in real life and in DCS, occur during the taxi phase. One tip that I like to tell new people is to make sure that you have your HSI page up on one of your DDIs so you can very quickly and easily monitor your ground speed as you're taxiing. It's important to note that the indicated airspeed in the FA-18 bottoms out at 48 knots of indicated airspeed, so ground speed is going to be the best way for you to see how fast you're going as you're taxiing. As you're taxiing in the FA-18, the NATOPS manual specifies to taxi as slowly as practical. I typically don't like to get above 15 knots of ground speed on a nice, open, wide, straightaway taxiway. And when I'm making a turn, especially a nice tight turn with nose wheel steering in high gain, I like to ensure that I'm about 8 knots of ground speed or lower. And while it's important to follow airport signage, you also need to keep your head on a swivel and ensure that following a center line on a taxiway is not going to have you inadvertently smash your wingtip into a bunker wall, such as this one off to our left. Taxiing on the center line in the FA-18 is accomplished very easily because the nose wheel is essentially right underneath your butt in the ejection seat. So if your butt is on the center line, that means you're on the center line. Our next right here will take us out to the runway for our intersection takeoff here at Bagram Air Force Base in Afghanistan. Once we're holding short of the runway, we can perform our B4 takeoff checklist. We'll ensure that our canopy is closed and locked. The oxygen flow knob for our OBOGs is on, and our mask is on, and we can breathe normally. We're going to turn on our IFF systems and ensure that we have the different modes selected that we need for today's mission. It's important to note that we don't turn on our IFF at engine start, because any power fluctuations to the various electrical buses in our aircraft could potentially break any of the transponders and electronics of the IFF system. We'll do an inertial navigation system check, making sure that our ground speed is at 0, true airspeed is at 70, and we have the correct navigational source selected, such as waypoint and waypoint 1 off the runway here at Bagram. We'll ensure that our parking brake is fully stowed, and we'll complete our menu checklist. For takeoff, we'll do one more control check, checking our FCS page, as well as visually checking that our control surfaces are moving as they should be. Ensuring that our wings are spread and locked. That our trim is set to 12 degrees nose up for a field takeoff. Flaps are in the half position. Hook is up. Harness is locked. Warning lights on the caution and advisories panel are extinguished. Nose wheel steering is set to low, and our ejection seat is armed. I usually like to set the HUD repeater on the left DDI for takeoff in case I'm taking off into the sun and I can no longer see my HUD, which is of course our primary flight instrument. We're now able to take the runway and take off with our takeoff clearance. We'll check final, and we'll check the runway to ensure that we're not going to run into anyone or that nobody is coming in to land on top of us. And because we're performing an intersection takeoff here at Bagram, we're going to ensure that we don't waste any of that runway length by squaring off this turn nice and tight. Make sure that nose wheel steering, high gain, is off. Run our engines up to 80% RPM. Release the brakes. And up to full military power. If afterburner is desired for your takeoff, push the throttles all the way up into the afterburner range. And the aircraft will naturally rotate off the ground at the correct rotation speed if you have takeoff trim set correctly. Gears up, flaps are up, check our gear and flap indicator, and we don't want to start compensating for wind drift or an asymmetrical loadout until we're at a safe altitude to avoid scraping a wingtip on the runway surface. And that's it, guys. We've now performed a NATOPS by the book cold start, taxi, and takeoff procedure in the A-18C Hornet. Please let me know if you guys would like additional variations on the cold start tutorial, such as for sitting alert or role-playing that you have an inoperative APU, and I'd be happy to provide those videos. Please let me know in the comment section down below. Enjoy the FA-18 and enjoy this beautiful game. We'll see you in the next one. Fly safe out there and have fun, guys.